I did introduce him at the beginning and tell you, but I will revisit his credentials. We have with us Mr. Joseph Torella, who is the author of the New York Times bestseller Tomorrowland, the 1964-1965 World's Fair and the Transformation of America, which was also a Barnes & Noble Discover Great New Writer selection and a Daily Beast hot read. In answer to the question that somebody asked me, and is he still here? Yes, there he is. The answer is no. This book did not, to restate the question, was this book the inspiration for or connected to in any way the film Tomorrowland? And I have it on the highest authority that, and I quote, I wish. So let me introduce to you Joseph Torella.
Hello. I'll tell you a funny story about the Tomorrowland movie in the book. The first press, and I think this is how Matthew found out about me. The Daily News did a story about me right around this time, right before the book came out. So it was November 2013. I'm from Queens, and I was writing a book about Queens. So the Queens Reporter did a story. It ran right around Thanksgiving. And my agent gets a call from a couple of Hollywood producers, one of them George Clooney's production company, saying they want a copy of the book. We're thinking, this is great. I'm quitting my job. I'm making millions, telling everyone who I didn't like what I actually thought of them, and this is gonna be awesome. Instead, I will say this, of the producers who called, Clooney's company did get back to us, and my agent was a little skeptical and said, well, are you really interested in the book, or are you just interested in a book called Tomorrowland because you got that movie coming out? And they were like, no, we're interested in Robert Moses. And they said, we think it's great. It'd be a great mini-series, but not a movie. Of course, the movie Tomorrowland, which is one word, my book has a hyphen. That was not an accident, because when we were naming it, I realized that Tomorrowland, one word, is a trademark by Disney. So I said, well, let's keep the hyphen, because that was what appeared in a copy for the fair, in an ad. Maybe I should have. Copyright infringement, I would have been sued, and we would have sold even more books today.
There's actually a copyright attorney in the back who's going to disagree.
Nice, come see me.
Okay, so let's start by talking to the audience about, you want to start from the point of departure, which is your research and...
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Start with it. So I'm from Queens, Bayside, Queens, and I was a freelance journalist right after college. I was a journalist for 18 years, and I was looking for a nonfiction book idea. And I thought, well, I read a book called The Bronx is Burning, which really has very little to do with the Bronx, but has a lot to do with New York City. So I thought, I wonder if anyone's read a book about.
Whoa, yeah,
We're back. About Queens. So I started Googling and doing research, and I came across the World's Fair. Now, I wasn't born when the World's Fair opened, but I remember my parents talking about it. And what I got confused about, and I am embarrassed to say, I only actually sorted out when I was doing this research in like 2007 or 8, that there were two fairs in the same spot, 25 years apart. Because I always wondered, why did my mother say that she went to the fair as a little girl, but then she took my brother to the fair? But and then I never bothered to think like what that meant. So then I realized, and so then I started looking at the dates of the '64 fair. I realized that it correlated to all these other events that at least I was familiar reading about: the Kennedy assassination, the Beatles' arrival, all the moments of civil rights, Kate Genovese. And so I started thinking, they had a fair devoted to peace through understanding just when all hell was breaking loose and the city was really coming apart. That's a great idea. And then I thought that that would be some dramatic tension for a book. And that's how I got involved with it.
Okay, so then in the course of that, how did you get interested in the pavilion?
Well, one of the things
as a modern ruin.
Well, one of the things that really struck me, and this is all I really knew about the fair, is it started bringing back memories when we would drive past what was left of the fair, which of course would include the New York State Pavilion. And as a kid, I used to wonder, what is that? And still, up until that moment where I'm doing the research, I often thought, what is that building in the back? Like, why is it? And then I had remember.
Yeah, that's good.
I remember reading about that it was designed by Philip Johnson and that they had actually made it a landmark to preserve it. But I didn't know, I knew the Unisphere had been fixed. I knew that the Queen's Museum was once a World's Fair building. Well, I found that out. So I knew there were things that were, money was being put into the park. But what astonished me the deeper I went into my research, once I kind of really grasped who Philip Johnson was and how important he was, how did they manage to let a building designed by one of the most famous architects of the 20th century allow to rot in the middle of New York City? And then, of course, as I did my research, I realized, oh, so after the fair it was used. It was used as a concert hall, and Zeppelin played there, and the Grateful Dead and other bands. And then it was a roller rink. So it got used, and people had very fond memories of it. But then the fiscal crisis hit. And of course, what happens, you know, the parts of the city on the end, Queens, Brooklyn, the Bronx, we won't mention Staten Island, get left behind. And the funding gets cut, and suddenly things are allowed to rot. And you can go around the city and find lots of places, but those places aren't all designed by Philip Johnson. And I think that's why the New York State Pavilion is different. And, you know, ironically, I think this happened after I met Matthew. It was a couple of years ago that the Mets...
Matthew Silva is the person who did this film.
The director, Matthew Silva. Once he got in contact and interviewed me, when you see me inside a room, that's my house, I think right around that time the Mets had the All-Star Game. And on the official logo for the New York Mets All-Star Game, Major League, whatever it was, 2013 All-Star Game, was the Unisphere and the New York State Pavilion. And of course, if you're not from New York and you've never been there, you would think, oh, what's that? Of course, when you see it up close, you're like, oh, why does it look like that? But according to this Major League Baseball logo, it's in great shape. So
it makes for a great logo.
It makes for a fantastic logo. So yeah, it was astounding to realize, wow, they really let it get to that. But as they say in the film, it's still here, so that's a bonus.
Have you found that since the film has been produced, that there has been even more attention paid to this?
Oh yeah, I mean, I was there, as you saw in the film, that day when they opened it up, and I was just completely astounded. I mean, I don't know, I walked in at the end, it's been a while since I've seen the film, but there should be a scene where the line goes over the bridge to 111th Street, right over the Grand Central, all the way back to Corona. And the people there, I mean, I actually didn't even get in. I don't think I still haven't been into the State Pavilion, because every time I've gone and they've had it open, the line has been so long. But no, I also met Melinda Katz, the Queensborough president, that night. That was the 50th anniversary of the fair. I had met her that night. We were both on New York One, and she had told me then that she had money saved aside. And now, I don't know if you passed it recently, but it's actually in even better shape. The top rim of the pavilion has been painted this sort of yellow canary, like the kind of yellow of a Ferrari. I forget who they got. Matthew would know. It was a painting company who I think devoted their time or just gave the city a good discount. So the top is painted, and it's really bright, and it stands out. And again, I live in Bayside. I can see it maybe from 2 miles away on the LIE, and it looks better. So it's coming along, and I think there's now a real movement to make a purpose for it, especially after the High Line in New York City.
Well, how many of you know the High Line? Yeah. Now, how many of you remember the High Line before? Yeah. So when things are repurposed, when modern ruins, so to speak, are repurposed, they can be as contemporary and as exciting and dynamic and create new memories for new generations.
Totally, until they get repurposed. I mean, that whole area where the High Line is a great example. So has anyone here been to Chelsea Market right by? So, I mean, this is like one of the hottest destinations now. And again, my parents told me this, because my parents are from Manhattan. Oh, that's the old Nabisco factory. To which I said, there's a Nabisco factory in New York? I had no idea. But it got repurposed. And then, ironically, I actually had asked my father, because he worked in the post office, about this High Line. He said, yeah, I was from the post office on 34th Street, and it would go in between. So it's just that it was just this old 19th century elevated train track that no one had bothered to rip down for whatever reason. Not like they were thinking, oh, we might use this someday. They just hadn't gotten around to doing it.
Because ripping things down costs money too.
That's true.
So how many of you went to the World's Fair in 1964-65? Yeah,
Wow.
this is a group.
Wow.
And how many of you? No, how many of you? Okay, that's a good question because I have. How many of you have not?
Wow,
Oh,
okay.
well, he has a good excuse.
1939 World's Fair.
Who was at the 1939 World's Fair? God
No.
bless you. Yes.
I don't believe it.
There you go. It's a good group. That's fantastic.
How many people went to both World's Fairs?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, fair
This is
number.
awesome. And how many of you have been back to see the modern ruin at any point since? Yeah. And anybody have any questions or thoughts that they want to share? Let me get you a mic. Hold on. I'm going to leave you up here while I go visit with the folks.
Sure.
Okay, we'll start at the back, because yesterday we were all about the people in the front, so.
I was going to ask you if the Queens Museum was part of it, but you already answered that the Queens Museum was part of the World's Fair. My other question is Terrace in the Park, which is presently there, part of the original World's Fair.
No, that was part of the 64 World's Fair. Yeah, it was. It was built, it was where the top was there was a restaurant there. That's where Robert Moses would entertain the VIPs. And the helicopter pad was where VIPs arrived. It's actually where the Beatles arrived via helicopter when they played at Shea Stadium.
Yes, they did.
So, yes, it was the Port Authority building.
Does anyone have from the World's Fair a large plant which was from the Hawaiian Pavilion, which started out as a 2-inch piece of bark that now I have as about a 5-foot tall plant?
Oh, wow.
I had two questions.
Yes.
One question is that I know Robert Moses had a thing for the World's Fair because he worked with two other guys, David Oates and last name, I don't know, a friend of David Oates, Nisselberg, I don't know his first name. They, all three of them, sort of had future plans to make Flushing Meadows Park a destination, like a park,
Right.
to make the park sparkling and
Absolutely.
and to keep the buildings from leftover from the two World's Fairs.
Yeah, I could.
And my second question is, will they ever open up the New York State Pavilion where people can go into it and the floor will be back to a map and where we can go up and look at
To the tower.
To the tower.
Right.
I never was in that pavilion during the World Fair in '64.
Well, to answer your first question, the whole reason Robert Moses got involved with the 64 Fair was to turn Flushing Meadow Park into, in his mind, into a park that would surpass the grandeur of Central Park. That was always the plan. He wanted to do it after the 39 Fair. There was no money. His involvement with that was he was just the landlord as the Parks Commissioner. In '64, he controlled everything. And unfortunately, there still wasn't money left over. There was a little, which he should have probably paid back to his investors. He decided not to, and just kind of fixed the park. But it never reached the dreams he wanted. He wanted he wanted a little Disney World in there. He wanted the Tivoli Gardens. He wanted a world-class museum. It didn't happen, obviously. And your second question was about, will they ever open it? I think they will. I think the Queensborough president, Melinda Katz, as the film says, she has $5.8 million. They've painted the top. They're going to put lights on it, is my understanding, and kind of solidify it. And I think that'll go a long way to getting it reopened and invested. And I'll tell you why. If you go to Terrace Park at night and you look out the window, you'll see Citi Field, you'll see the Unisphere, you'll see the Queens Theater, And when you look at the State Pavilion, you'll see one little blinking red light for the airplanes not to crash into it. So you can't see it at night. And until it's lit up and you can kind of get a sense of its grandeur, then people are going to look past it. But once it's lit up and people are driving by, like, what is that strange, beautiful building and the way it's all lit? Someone will start to think, what can we do? And now, by the way, I forget who it was, but they're going to have a major 3-day music festival in Flushing Meadow, the park. This was just announced. I'm not sure when, this summer, next summer. So once people start seeing that Flushing Meadows is a place where you can have fairs and festivals and things like that, someone will come along and there will be, we'll get our New York State Pavilion back completely.
Another question.
Actually, I don't have, I have a comment, if it's okay. Well, I just want to say that it's significant that this film is being shown at this time. This year is the 50th anniversary of the landmarks law in New York City, which Jackie Kennedy helped get after we lost Penn Station. And right now, the Landmarks Commission is trying to take off the calendar something 90 some odd sites that they've never taken action on, and they're having hearings downtown. And if anybody would like to get involved in that, to try to petition the Landmarks Commission or testify about some of these great landmarks that we're losing. I'm a New York City sightseeing tour guide, and the sightseeing tour guides are trying to keep our history.
Right.
So just.
We have someone back here.
Thank you. Other than an air and space museum, what other proposals have been put forward?
That was the only real serious one that I saw. I mean, there are all sorts of architects just making their own drawings, kind of ideas, but my understanding is this Air and Space Museum was the only official one that was seriously considered. One of the architects in the film, Frankie Campione, I believe is his name, he has a whole series of drawings. I think some of them were about the Space Museum, but I mean, if you just think about it, if they can turn the High Line, again, just a 19th century railroad track that no one took the time to rip down, they could take a Philip Johnson designed building and do something creative with it.
We have time for a couple more, so let me just.
Just quickly, what is the purpose of the Unisphere? Is it anything
It was-
special, or is just?
It was the symbol of the whole fair itself, peace through understanding. You have to remember, the fair was conceived, and this concept of peace through understanding was conceived in about, well, probably as early as 58, but really 1959, kind of the height of the Cold War. And the whole time that they're building the fair, the Cold War is going on in terms of like the Kennedy years. So you think of the Berlin Wall, the Cuban Missile Crisis. So this concept of peace through understanding, which even some critics at the time thought was corny, even John F. Kennedy himself, especially when he came to Queens and he broke the ground for what would be the Federal Pavilion. This is about 6 weeks after the Cuban Missile Crisis, which is, I have a few books outside for sale if you want them. That's how the book opens. He's breaking ground. So he was deadly serious that the idea of having a fair in America after the Cuban Missile Crisis devoted to peace was probably the most intelligent thing we could do after having come so close to nuclear war.
Someone back there asked if the Unisphere was part of the 64 or the 39. When did it come?
It was the 64. 64. The 39 symbols were the Trilon and Perisphere,
Yeah.
which
good.
just, you guys are good.
You're sharp. You can't mess with this group. Somebody had a question up here? Last questions. 1, 2, and then we let this man go out there. We buy some books.
I guess I'm a little confused about, I do go to Flushing Meadow Park. I've been there a number of times with my family, even though I live out here. And I go to, the tennis center, so I use Flushing Meadow Park then. And I don't understand why I didn't know any of this. Why I didn't know any of this information, that they were raising money for this.
I would
It's
say,
the best kept secret.
yeah, well, are you originally from Queens?
Yep.
Okay. Anyone else here originally from Queens? I feel like we Queens people know that Queens is a sort of well-kept secret, and that fortunately or unfortunately is now making it out there. I don't know if you know this, but Queens was selected as the #1 world destination by some travel guide. I forget who it was, Lonely Planet. And it's the hottest place right now in New York for hipster neighborhoods, and real estate's going up, which is good for me. But in terms of Queens has always sort of been taken for granted, so it doesn't surprise me. I mean, I was surprised to learn that Flushing Meadow Park was at one time the largest park. It's been encroached upon by like the USTA and stuff like that, but it's still one of the largest parks in the city, and it does not get the love that it deserves. However, just recently, when the USTA Tennis Center renegotiated its deal, fortunately there's a very tough assemblywoman from Corona. Unlike most assembly people, she actually does something for a living, and she got the USDA to concede something like $10 million to start a conservancy fund, like Central Park has a conservancy. Of course, look at Central Park; it's surrounded by Fifth Avenue, right? A little easier to get money than had to say Corona and the Flushing Swamp. So, however, the $10 million has been held up thanks to City Hall, but it is now apparently the committee is set and they're going to begin. So I think this is really we're at the outset of people learning, and the city itself maybe even saying, hey, everyone, there's this wonderful destination. It's right here, it's accessible by the Long Island Railroad, by the 7 train. There's even new 7 trains. I mean, it's a whole new world out there.
Last question by the man who asked the first question.
Well, it's not actually the last question. My name is Warren Woods, and I'm with a peace organization that's active on Long Island, trying to end wars and trying to get people to see the value of peace. And when I saw the opening of the 50th anniversary listed in the newspaper about 3 weeks before it happened, I made plans to get a group of our peaceniks together and go down there and show up with large signs saying, quote, peace through understanding, with a question mark. So I do appreciate your comment. It is an irony.
No problem.
I'd like you all to help me thank our guests. Thank you so much for coming out today.
Yes, I have a few books outside. If anyone wants to buy a copy, I'd be happy to sign them for you.
That's wonderful. Okay, I want to be the first one. Thank you all for coming, and we look forward to seeing you at the rest of the festival. Remember, every day we're going to show a lot of great films.